Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me in studying this week's Torah portion. Today, we're studying the combined portions of Nitzavim and Vayeilech. Nitzavim is standing strong, Vayeilech walking around. The beginning of the portion, Moshe is speaking to the entire Jewish people, and he begins his speech with the words, Atem, you, Nitzavim, standing strong, firm, hayom, today, kulchem, all of you, lifnei Hashem Elokechem, before God, you Lord, rashechem, you heads, you leaders, ziknechem, you elders, and he lists 10 categories of people, all the way to the wood carriers and the water carriers and the wood choppers. So there are 10 categories: women, men, children, etc. The entire Jewish people is standing here, and I le'ovrecha bivrit, to enter into a covenant with God. It is actually the second covenant. There was a covenant before when God gave us the Torah, etc., but there was not a permanent covenant. Now there is going to be a permanent covenant for the Jewish people forever. The word ayom, today, ayom, atem nitzavim ayom, you standing today, is seemingly not unnecessary. It doesn't matter if it was today or yesterday. So the simple commentators explain today refers to Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, which reminds us that every Rosh Hashanah, Hashem makes a new covenant with the Jewish people. That's why ayom, the word in our by our sages in the Bible, in Job, we read the word hayom refers to Rosh Hashanah. That's why it injected the word hayom into the wording, Moshe Rabbeinu, introduction to his speech.
If I'm not mistaken, please correct me. Twice in history, the Jews, all the souls present in the future, were there to accept. One was at Matan Torah.
That's correct. No, I'm not so sure. And this is going to be the topic of our discussion about who was there at the covenant. So now they're making a covenant with Jewish people, between God and the Jewish people. Hayom, today, meaning today, which, as I said, refers to Rosh Hashanah. That's according to most commentators. There are other interpretations. Unfortunately, we don't have the English text, so we're going to read it from Likutei Sichos chapter, book, volume 19, the first talk of the Rebbe and the weekly portion. I am going to read it quick for the sake of those of us who can follow Yiddish. I also will skip some sections and summarize it so we don't get into the technicality. If atem nitzavim hayom, in the word regarding the first two words, you standing today, stellt sich Rashi und is mefaresh. Rashi is bothered to explain. Melamed, these are the words of Rashi. Melamed teaches us shekinso Moshe lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Moshe gathered them before God, beyom moto, the day he died, lachnisam bevrit, to make them enter into covenant. No, that's not the one I wanted to talk about. We're going to study the second talk in volume 19. I'm sorry. Let's start again. Beim Christus Bris, Bereish Parshasenu, when regards to the covenant at the beginning of this week's portion, wird gesagt in Posuk, it's written in the text, Velo itchem levadchem anochi koret et habrit hazot, not only with you alone, I am making the covenant, ve'et ha'ala hazot, and this bonding, ki bat et asher yeshno po imonu omed hayom lifnei Hashem Elokeinu, those who are standing here before us, before God, ve'et asher einenu po imanu hayom, and those who are not with us. So the beginning of the Torah, when we read about the covenant, before we start making the covenant, he lists 10 categories of Jews, and then he says, now the covenant is going with those of us who are here, all of us, and those who are not here before us today are also into the covenant. stellt sich Rashi. Rashi stands on this with the wörter ve'et asher inenu po, and the words those who are not found here. Und is mefarish, and he explains ve'af im doiros ha'asidim liyos, also with generations that will come to be. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people the covenant is not, as Harry beautifully pointed out, the covenant is not only with us, those of us who are standing before Moshe today, but also future generations who will come are also entered into the covenants. Lernen meforshim. The commentators explains, as Rashi bavon der mit, Rashi wants to teach us, men soll nicht teitschen asher inenu po mein die Iden von jenem do, wo seinen dort nicht given bei Yisrael Ma'amad. He's not talking about Jews that were not there in front of the Moshe, but they were in the tents, like sick people, nursing mother giving birth, people who are busy with emergencies. And it's impossible to say that that's what is referring those who are not here, because it says atem, you Nitzavim, standing ayom, today, kulchem meaning everyone, meaning that at that day, miraculously, all the Jewish people who are alive who are standing there. So you cannot say those who are not with us refer to people who stayed home. As alle Eden haben sich gefunden bei Yisrael Ma'amad. All the Jews that were alive at the time who were standing in front of Moshe. The Rebbe sagt Rashi, therefore Rashi needed to explain what it refers to when he says those who are not present. It refers to the future generations that are not here. They also are here entering into the covenant. Das ist aber nicht maßbig. It's not a good explanation, says the Rebbe. The Rebbe is going to ask 7 questions. I'm going to share with you this 7 questions very briefly, because we're not going to get lost. The first, he says, Rashi tells us that when Moshe says that this covenant is for those who are present and those who are not present, and Rashi says not present refers to people in future generations, says the Rebbe, how is it possible to make a covenant with people who are not here? He says the covenant le'avrecha, to enter a covenant with those who are here and those who are not here. Rashi says it's not about people who didn't show up, because everybody showed up. It says kulchem, but it refers to future generations. Rashi says it refers to future generations, but Rashi is not explaining us how. How do you make a covenant against someone, or if he's not present? You know what a covenant is? 2 people make a pact. You can't make a pact with someone against their will or without his knowledge, or he's not around. That's question number 2. So says the Rebbe, some explain that because those people who are the descendants of these people who are here, therefore they are instead of their parents. There is a phrase in Jewish law says, Bro kara de'avua. The son is like the extension of his father, and therefore the father stood here, and it applies to the future generations. Says the Rebbe, but it doesn't make sense, because Rashi himself does not say that. In other words, Rashi does not bother to explain how. Rashi just says that it refers to future generations. But how? How is it applied to it? That's the first question. Number 2, Rashi was teaching it to a 5-year-old child. A 5-year-old child would be very difficult to explain to him that you make a covenant with people who are not here refers to people who are not born yet. It's much easier to say perhaps somebody is not around because he's sick, because he's unable to walk. The fact that it says kulchem, all of you, that contradicts it. But Rashi did not bother to explain this point. Pushing it off by saying that it's for future generations does not address the 5-year-old child. Number 3, says the Rebbe, making a covenant with future generations appears twice in the Torah before. One is the covenant God made with Abraham, in the covenant between the Brit Ben Abtarim, when he walked between the thorn animal, and there is a dove that he had to let go, and God, there was a great darkness and painful experience, and God says, don't worry, I'm making a covenant with you that your children will always come back. So there was a covenant before for future generations that God made with Abraham. Rashi doesn't bother to tell us how is it possible for God to make a covenant with people who are not around. Question number two, and a second time, is in the giving of the Torah. When God gave the Torah to our ancestors, he made a covenant for the future generations. In other words, they made a covenant with God 3,000 years ago for me. I'm obligated in the same covenant that they had made. Rashi don't bother to explain how is it possible. Why here, when we say that it's for those who are not around, Rashi needs to bother explain. He didn't give us the reason. He just says it refers to future generations as if it's something very difficult to comprehend. Either if it's difficult to comprehend, you should have bothered explaining it in the previous two. So we have two other covenants that the Jewish people entered into between God and the Jewish people, one with Abraham, one with the giving of the Torah. Number 4, there is a problem with converts. If you're talking about that the children are the extension of the parents, what happens with those who converted to Judaism? Are they part of the covenant? Are they at the covenant today with that Moshe or not? Rashi did not deal with this. Rashi is not talking about converts. The Gemara is dealing with converts, and the Gemara comes up and explains it in different ways. But Rashi did not deal with this situation. Rashi says, Atem Nitzavim Vayeilech kulchem, you all stand before me, those who are present and those who are not present. Rashi says those who are not present are not sick people or people who couldn't make it because everybody was there. It just refers to future generations. But Rashi, it doesn't tell us how. That's number 1. Number 2, what happened to people who joined the Jewish people after, in 1,000 years, in 2,000 years? Are they included with the covenant, or they do not have that covenant?
Moabites, future.
Huh?
Moab was allowed to marry the Jews.
Moabite were allowed to.
Like no woman. The women were allowed to convert.
She converted.
Right.
So it's conversion. Well, I'm talking about all the converts. All the converts includes Ruth, right? And therefore, says the Rebbe, it makes common sense is that covenant, that's question number 5. Common sense is that covenant was done with converts equally as same as the Jewish people. Rashi omitted it, and he's saying that the covenant is with the future generations, and he omitted the text from the Talmud that says in the upcoming generations, including the covenant, the converts. Rashi did not. Rashi changed. Rashi is entitled to change. It doesn't always stick to the exact original text in order for him to explain something different in the text. However, omitting the converts from this discussion deserves some addressing this. Then there is a discrepancy in the text. The Talmud and the Medrash Tanchuma says that when that Moshe says with generations who are not here, they says all the generations to come. Dorot abaim, lavo means to come, to arrive. Rashi does not say that are coming. Rashi say atidim liyot, that will be created, which is a little different. Rashi could have used the exact text as the Talmud and the Medrash. If we change it, there is a reason. And number 7, Rashi is addressing 2 words, einenu po, people who are not here, and for that Rashi says it talks about the future generation to come. But Rashi copied the text from the Torah, few other words prior, which seemingly are not being addressed. Why is Rashi adding those? If Rashi in the title adds more words from the text, it means he's addressing other points. Here is the Rebbe's. Did you understand the questions? Simple questions. Pretty much the question is about Rashi deviation from the text. Rashi is adding more words in the title. Rashi does not address converts. He omitted it. Rashi does not explain to us how this covenant is done. Rashi just said there is a covenant for future. He doesn't tell us how. Question number 6 is the child does not know about how is possible to achieve such a covenant. People are not here, and Rashi does not address that. And the last question is, we had 2 other covenants before with future generations. Rashi don't bother to explain. How come here Rashi bothers? Now let's see the explanation. Rashi dafnit bavonen viazoimen ken machen a krisas bis mit de deres atidim liyos, valdos is moving me'atzmoi. Says the Rebbe, the foundation the Rebbe is laying down. How to make a covenant with future generations do not need any explanation. Why? Der Christus bris hat gemacht der Oberster because of who made the covenant? God. As the text says, Asher Hashem Elokecha Dat, God, you Lord, koretim hayom. Moshe is not making the covenant. It's God, our Lord, is making a covenant. God can do anything he wants. Therefore, says the Rebbe, und jeder versteht, everybody understand, as der Oberster, that God can Kyres Brisi sein euch mit die Deres, was will noch kommen. God can make the covenant with the future generations. He can implant a chip in all the souls that will come, that part of the chip is a covenant. In other words, says the Rebbe, when Moshe says, God, you Lord, is making a covenant with you, and then the Torah says, those who are present, those who are not present, you don't need to understand how is it possible. Why? Because God is making it. If God makes it, God can do it. And das is so poshut, it is so obvious, says the Rebbe. As Rashi darf afilo nit bewohnen, as is nit kin stira, was früher steht Hashem Elokecha, und danach steht Anechi Koyres. It's so obvious that Rashi didn't need to address that. It's obviously, that's why in the previous 2 times, it was God making a covenant, the giving of the Torah with Abraham, therefore it's applicable to the future generations. Und das ist euch der Tam bepashtus, was Rashi darf nicht masber sein, wie soll, hat es der Oberster gesagt, Moshe die Mitzvah ist auf alle deres, und wie soll, die Bris ben Absorim, mit Avroam, Yisrael auf die später dicke deres. Says the Rebbe, that's why Rashi didn't bother to explain why. Rashi did not bother to explain how is it possible. By Abraham, with the Bris ben Abtarim, he does not bother. By the giving of the Torah, he does not bother. And over here too, Rashi does not need to address how. God is doing the covenant. He can do it with people who are not born yet. Das, was Rashi darf und kommt jemmer sein, what Rashi is bothered and is needed to explain, mitvafim deres hasidim lios, Rashi adds, we told the future generations, is nicht der etzem ha'inyan as der Christus bris is given euch mit die deres shel achritze. It's not the idea that a covenant is possible with future generations, because that's obvious. No, the way in which God made the covenant, wie der Christus bris is given mit deres hasidim lios. How did God do? How is it possible? We already addressed, there is no discussion. God can do anything he wants. Rashi wouldn't bother explaining it, like he did not bother explaining it by Abraham and the Torah, giving of the Torah. Rashi is bothered to explain how God is making today a covenant with the people who are present and with the people who will come. From the language, not only with you, I make the covenant, this covenant, but also those who are present and those who are not. It's verstandig, it's self-understood as the Christus bris, that the covenant is gemacht geworden direkt mit asher enenu poi, und in selben Neufen Punkt wie mit asher yeshno poi. Rashi wants to tell us that the covenant God is making with the Jewish people, those who are present and those who will be born later, it is equally the same. Therefore, God is making a covenant with someone present, and God is making a covenant with someone who is not present because he'll be born 3,000 years from now, it is equally the same. There is no difference between, because for God, he can do it. That's what Rashi says with future generations. Yes, Leon.
It makes me think that it gives us insight to God's house, because he doesn't have the restrictions of time.
Right. No limitations. That's the point. And that's what Rashi wants to address. In other words, remember what I tell, I'm jumping ahead, but I think I want to save time. Remember I shared with you what the Gemara says, that the reason God made a covenant with the Jewish future generation is because the son is in the foot of the father, an extension of the father. Remember I shared that? Rashi actually wants to reject the idea. According to the Talmud, there are two ways in which a covenant God made with the future generations. One of them is that God is treating the children on behalf, they stand on behalf of their parents, and future generation on behalf of previous generations. In other words, it's like a chain with many links. So when you shake the top link, it affects all the links later. Therefore, they need to address, where are the converts coming into play? Where are they in the links? And therefore, the Gemara comes up with different explanations. The Rebbe says, look at Rashi. Rashi says that the covenant is made with the people who are present and with the people who are not present equally. Therefore, he has no use to explain or to put emphasis about converts. Because anytime someone is converted, they receive a Jewish soul. That Jewish soul was present at the time of the covenant. Therefore, Rashi omitted the whole idea of converts. That's why Rashi is not going to say the way the Talmud. I'm jumping ahead, but I want to get to the point. I want to make it clear, not to get bothered with the technicality. That's why Rashi said he's making a covenant hayom today with the generation that will be created, not those who come after them. Remember, the Rebbe is asking about the discrepancy in the language. The Talmud and the Tanchuma says, Dorot aba'im acharem, the generations that will come after them are all included here. In other words, the reason they are included is because they are the one who continue from those people who stood by Mount Sinai. It's like if your father sign a contract with the bank and he says it applies, I'm liable, or I make this pact with you, this business forever. Therefore, if I assume the ownership of the business, I am obligated by the contract. If my son is assuming the business, the responsibility of the business, he has to follow all the contracts the business signed. So the only reason that children or grandchildren have to follow the covenant is because their father signed the contract. That's the way it's written. If you say, that's the way the Talmud and Tanchuma explain, Aba'im acharem, who are coming after them. In other words, it's like links that are hanging on the top, and therefore they're connected to the top because of the top links. The Rashi change, anytime Rashi deviates from the language, it's because Rashi is hinting to something else. That's the way the Rebbe explains. Rashi says, Atidim liyot, all generations that will be created later. Nothing to do with their parents, nothing to do with a direct link linking them to those who stood physically. Because, as Leon pointed out, for God, there is no limitations. Therefore, he can make a covenant equally 100% identical to people who are standing before him and people who are not around for 3,000 years. And therefore, it's not due to the fact that they are the children or descendants of people who are stood by, but they themselves, the souls themselves were there. And therefore, each made the bris directly, not non-direct, just a minute. And again, I have to emphasize, therefore, says Rabbi Rashi omitted the whole idea of converts from, even though the Talmud is dealing with it, because the way Rashi explains it, the converts are as equal with the covenant with God, just like the people who stood there, just like 1,000 years later, people who stood then, and therefore they all are equally the same. Yes, Harry?
I think we did more here with the verbiage. Because if you say everybody who's here and everybody who isn't here, that includes everything. Links, people, future, it's all inclusive.
You are 100% right. But I want to shed light to 2 points. It's not nuance. I disagree, because we'll see why in a moment. The first is Rashi is changing. So Rashi changes, number one. Number two, but that's minor for us. But the real reason is the Rebbe explained that how a covenant is made with God for future generations is a totally non-issue. That you understand, right? Therefore, the covenant that was made with people who are present is equally the same with people who are unpresent, right? The question is, how was the covenant made with people who are not around? According to the Talmud, the covenant was done because they were descendants of those who stood there. In other words, the reason I have the right to the Torah, the reason I have the obligation to follow God is because my great-great-great-great-grandfather stood there, and therefore it passed on to future generations. Rashi is disagreeing with the whole idea. Rashi says that my access to God is direct and equal to those who stood at the time in their bodies. Do you understand that? To me, it's very powerful. Not only that, by explaining it this way, this is the Kabbalistic understanding, it takes care of those who are added to the Jewish people. Because the Gemara is grappling with this issue. If a covenant is made with those who are not around, and it's because the descendants are standing here today, what happened to people who added to the Jewish people later? And the Gemara needs to come up with different explanations. Rashi didn't even need to address that, because based on the way we see it, they are treated, or not, their souls who are there equally, have equal access. To me, it's very powerful. I want to get to the end, even though we're going to finish early, which is a blessing. I want to do what the Rebbe, the lesson from it, and that's why it's not so minor. That's the second point. Says the Rebbe, von dem Pirush Rashi, the way Rashi explains, kum tarois, we can learn a gewaltige oiro. You know what gewaldi is? Huge, unprecedented lesson. In an Indian was mod gered kama pamim, regarding a topic that we have spoken many, many times. Es can treffen, it's possible, as a Eid soll amol sein, Rob gefallen bei sich, a Jew fell down from his level. Im fällt Starkheit in Ausführen seiner Avodah Mitzvahs. He is missing in his service to God in study Torah and fulfill mitzvot. Ubifrat beim Aroizgen in Welt zu mefit sein Yadus v'cholo, especially to interact with others to teach him Torah. V'val das atema me'at mikol ha'amim, because he feels that we are the smallest. We are very small. We are the minority. You look around, there is this house of worship, this house of worship, and the Jewish people have very, very few. And people sometimes get depressed from it. How will I be able to speak to a fellow Jew who never connected to Torah and say to him, come, connect to God, you'll have the greatest, the best, where he says all the employees, there are 9 other employees, they all go on Sunday to church. What are you talking about? We are very small. Is there Entfer of them, the answer for that? Das ist als bishas men red wegen Kamus von Eden. It's only when you talk about quantity, comparing numbers. Was Kamus is mugbol in unmodud in zman mokim. Quantity is limited to space and time. So today there are so many people, Jewish people around, so many Jewish people in our community, which is a small number. In the world also, the number is very small. When it's at them, because of that, and therefore, because of that, they are always in the minority, always the smallest. Because by Jews, the most important is the quality, not the quantity. Torah mitzvahs, which is what study Torah and fulfill mitzvot, connecting to God on a quality level, is bishas it verbindet sich mit Eibishter. When a Jew connects to God durch Torah mitzvot by studying Torah and fulfilling mitzvot, was is lemaila mitzvah mokoim, that is above space and time. The Torah was given as not limited to space and time. Is menemmelt verbunden ba'amitis ubefol mit alle Eden shebechol olam v'shebechol hadeos. Says the Rebbe, when you do study Torah, you know what happens? You tap in to a community of people that lives throughout 3,300 years. 3,300 years and 30 years are connected together through the Torah mitzvot. That's why God made a covenant with those who are present and those who are not present, because it doesn't make another covenant with us. It doesn't make a covenant with our parents and we are into the covenant because we are in a package deal as children. No, it doesn't work like that. The covenant is direct. And therefore, when I tap into connecting to God by fulfilling the covenant, I am part of a body that exists for 3,300 years. So therefore, we are in a majority. That creates a majority even in quantity, because the number of people who live throughout generations as Jewish people are all into one covenant, as opposed to the non-Jews. Every generation is different. Und das ist mudgash in Pirush Rashi, says the Rebbe, you can find it in the text of Rashi. Ve'af, Rashi adds the word ve'af, also, and also, in Deiros Hasidim Lios, in generations that will be created. Just like the generation that stood before Moshe, by them Christus bris von Eibeshem mit Eden sein Eden shebechol haderes gestanden dem alt alle zusammen. Just like at the time, you had people who stood there physically with their bodies, but you had people who stood there spiritually. People who are going to be born 2,000 years later, their soul representing them. So you have a large group of men making a covenant. When you fulfill the covenant, what happens is you reconnect with that covenant and you are surrounded by all the people from all future generations. Mitiden shebechol haderes, and all Jews from future generations, gestanden demalt alle zusammen. Alle seinen ein Metzius. They all became one entity. Von dem ist verstandig, from that you can understand, as we shall say, it is verbunden begolem mit dem Eibester, when a man connect to God, bevris, through the covenant, fulfilling the covenant, durch Kiyum HaTorah mitzvot, by studying Torah and fulfilling mitzvot, stehen mit him, standing along with his side, alle Eden shebedere u, all the Jews in that in his generation, von alle Deus, and also from all other future generations and previous, alle zusammen sein, akim achashlemo. Everybody else is one body. Und demol sein Eden nicht kein mehr. Now, then, when you study Torah and fulfill the mitzvahs, you're not a minority anymore. Euch nicht bekamos, even in quantity. Adraba, exactly the opposite. Eden sein ribu yotzum, all the Jewish people are a very large number. Euch bekamos, also in numbers, und sie haben sich nicht was zu schrecken. They don't have to get scared or afraid. Afilu nicht mitzad kamus, for a mitzvah godel bekamos from going, even with when they stayed and be compared to the numbers of non-Jews. Und adraba, and quite the opposite, people are most of a pachad. When we are united as one, that's the purpose of the covenant. All Jews standing together openly. That explains the idea of Rosh Hashanah. Today's Rosh Hashanah, referring to Rosh Hashanah, when we're united, we are coming as a one large body. And therefore, God will look at the entire body and say, well, there is a great man over here, there is a great rabbi over there. They are all part of the same entity, and his majority of these people are good, and therefore he gives us a good year. Does bring the it brings to a good sealing and inscription to every Jew, single Jew, in all positive and good. Did you understand what the Rebbe is saying? So now you understand that's a very important point. And again, let's summarize it very briefly. When you go out to the world as a Jew, you face 1 to 100, 1 to 1,000 sometimes, and it's very difficult to comprehend and accept that. Says the Rebbe, but realize the covenant, according to Rashi, the covenant was made equally with people 3,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 1,000 years ago, today, 100 years ago, and 100 years from now. All of it standing together. So when we study Torah, when we fulfill the mitzvot, what do? We fulfill the covenant. That covenant was done in presence of millions and myriads of millions of people from all future generations. That's the uniqueness. God can do it. And therefore, when I connect to God and I study Torah, I'm not 1 against 1,000, but quite the opposite. Suddenly the world is in the minority. Not only that, that's why the beginning of the portion is Atem Nitzavim Hayom, you standing firm today What Ayom today, I said to you, according to all, it's Rosh Hashanah. That's how you make a covenant. That's how you come to Rosh Hashanah, reminding God about the covenant, fulfilling this covenant by studying Torah and mitzvot. Then when you stand on Rosh Hashanah before God and you say to him, I'm part of the entire Jewish people of all future and past generations, and therefore we are good, we are a blessing, and judge us favorably. And that's the end of our discussion today. I hope I made myself clear.